My Hero Academia, All Grown Up. Chapter 15. Uraraka tapped her fingers worriedly on the table she was seated at. It had taken her all day to muster up the courage to finally call Deku and ask him to meet her. She'd shown up 20 minutes early, hoping it would help relax her, but she was still feeling nervous. Her eyes darted to the front of the restaurant as the door chimed with a new customer. It wasn't Deku, and she was almost ashamed with the relief that flooded her gut. She'd still have a few minutes to gather her thoughts. She figured that the best way to fixing their relationship was honesty. She couldn't keep her feelings about the situation to herself any longer. She'd have to tell Deku exactly how she felt, but that was a far easier task said than done. It was going to be a difficult talk, but it needed to happen for the sake of them as a couple. A few more minutes passed before a familiar person finally entered the shop. Deku was in relaxed clothes, and he looked both concerned and hopeful as he joined her at the table. "Hey," he smiled weakly at her. She smiled softly back. "I ordered your drink. I hope that's okay." She restlessly fingered the menu on the tabletop. "That's perfectly fine," he nodded, and acknowledged the uncertain edge of them both. "How are you?" "I'm well," she nodded a reply. "I'm sorry it took me so long to call. It's just been a crazy weekend." "I understand." Deku recognized her awkward demeanor. "Uraraka, I'm really sorry. I should have told you that I was coming. I see now that it was a stupid idea to keep it from you." She shook her head wildly. "No, you're wrong. I should be apologizing to you. I overreacted when I saw you in my apartment, and I should have dashed." She was abruptly cut off by their waitress delivering their drinks. "Are you two ready to order?"
Yeah.
She stopped her earlier comments and glanced across the table at Deku. "I am, are you?" Deku blinked at her before his eyes dropped down to the menu. "Well, how about you order first, huh?" She nodded briefly before slowly reciting her preferred meal, hoping it would give Deku the time he needed to choose. Little did she know, he simply scanned the menu and chose the first thing that jumped out at him. He doubted his anxious stomach could actually hold any food. The waitress graciously took their orders down before bowing away and retreating to the kitchen. "Anyway," Uraraka cleared her throat awkwardly. "I don't remember what I was saying." "It doesn't matter," Deku shook his head. "I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am that I came to Japan without telling you. I just thought that I could surprise you, and..." He let the rest of the sentence hang in the air. Uraraka sipped her water before sighing. "Deku, I wasn't angry that you came to Japan. I was angry for some other reasons." Her boyfriend blinked at her from across the table. "I know you are. I guess I just can't really see what they are right now." The brunette chewed on her bottom lip. Well, she wasn't sure where to start. "I guess that the biggest problem is that I don't think you really see me as a hero. I don't feel like I have your respect." "My respect?" Deku's jaw fell open. "Of course you have my respect, Uraraka." "No," she corrected. "Like, as a hero. You worry about me so much that it makes me think that you don't think I'm strong or something. I feel like I'm just some helpless civilian in your eyes, you know?" Deku paused and drank in her words. They seemed strange coming from her mouth. Uraraka wasn't normally this forthcoming. "You know I don't actually think that, right? You are one of the strongest people I know." "Yes, I do know." She absent-mindedly tipped her spoon on the table. "It's just been hard to remember that with you gone. Maybe it has something to do with me moving here to Tokyo? Or maybe my new agency. Whatever it is, I feel like you're always worrying about me over nothing." Deku frowned slightly. "So you think I'm being too overprotective?" She pondered the wording. "I guess that is what I would call it." He looked down at his silverware, mirroring Uraraka's own gaze. "I can see what you mean. I didn't realize that I was being like that. I feel like..." She tried to sort out her thoughts. "I guess I feel like I am also overreacting a little. I mean, you've always been like this, but I just see it more now that you're not here." Deku nodded slowly and tilted his head up to try and capture her gaze. "Well, you're not wrong. I can't help it. I just worry about you all the time. I'm always wondering what you're doing and where you are. I'd be heartbroken if something happened to you while I was..." He choked on the words in his throat. "I just want to know you're safe." She finally looked away from her silverware to meet his gaze, her own eyes filled with determination. "I can get that, but Deku, I am a pro hero. You don't have to worry about me like that. I'm perfectly safe at any time. I'm a big girl, you know? I can take care of myself. He was silent and nodded at her somewhat icy tone. I know, but I can't help it. He paused to search for a solution. I don't mean to insult you when I'm asking. I just feel better when I know. Being so far away makes it hard for me, and when you're out with everyone from school, I get really freaked out. You've never really been the drinking type, so I worry more about you getting home safe. Uraraka leaned back in her chair and sighed. That's the other big problem, Deku. The distance. It's so far. He met her eyes again. I know it is. It's just as hard on me as it is you. I can guarantee that. It's more than just hard. She tugged on a lock of her hair. When I wake up, you're going to bed. It's tough to find the time and energy to work around that. I just don't understand why we couldn't just move to Tokyo together instead of you going to America. Deku gulped and looked down at the table. I'm regretting it too, but I have to finish the job. If I back out now, what does that say about me as a hero? That you have priorities that matter, she replied coolly. Deku felt his heart constrict at her statement. His mind immediately reverted back to the conversation that he'd had with Bakugou yesterday morning. Bakugou had said basically the same thing. Sometimes there are things more important than being a hero. Guilt built up in his gut, but he had to swallow it. This opportunity. I just can't let it go right now. I need this experience, Uraraka. I may never have another chance like this one. I thought you'd say that. She gave the lock of hair a final tug. I can't say that I don't understand it. Why don't you just come with me? Deku's tone raised an octave. We could work together, and we'd be able to go back to the way things were with us. She blinked at his proposal. And I'll just what? Leave my job and everything else behind. She felt irritation slowly working its way up her back. We've been over this, Deku. My parents, they rely on me for money. There is no way I could match the amount of money I make now in America. My life is here. Our life is here. I will help with all of that. Deku urged her to consider the idea. No, she shook her head sharply. I just can't do it, Deku. It's the one thing I'm not willing to give up. I love my job here, and I love the city. This is what I've wanted for years, and I'm sorry, but I can't put it off for another year again. I'm already too far behind everyone else. Deku couldn't argue with that. Uraraka rarely said no to anything, especially when it came to them as a couple. But she seemed like she'd changed since he went away. She seemed more confident and self-reliant. She'd made it perfectly clear that she was not going to bend on this. Okay, Deku nodded weakly. Then we'll have to just try harder as a couple. Deku, she leaned over the table to look at him steadily. If we're going to make things work, we have to change our habits. I can't keep feeling like I'm having to check in with you like you're my dad. I also have to have equal say in this relationship. He sighed and nodded. I'll try to be better, Uraraka. As long as you promise to be smart and not do anything stupid, I will try. And you have to have faith in me, she concluded. If I don't have your confidence, I can do that. Deku breathed the words out before she could finish. I know you're strong, Uraraka. You make a fine hero. A smile brushed her lips. Thank you. They met eyes for a few more minutes before their food was delivered to them. The topic was inevitably dropped after that, and both of them worked toward normalizing their conversation. They still had a boatload of problems to work out, but for now, they would simply share a meal. Bakugou walked down the sidewalk to a familiar apartment complex, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The evening sun had dropped into dusk and the hot air of the day began to cool to a comfortable temperature. He adjusted the strap to the bag and grumbled to himself about his situation. After he'd received the tip from his informant, he'd gone straight home and grabbed his hero costume. In the event that his informant contacted him again, he wanted to be ready. Once he'd climbed the stairs to the floor he needed, he paused at the doorway. He'd avoided this situation long enough, and now he had to do what was required of him. He begrudgingly knocked on the door and waited. Bakugou. Uraraka poked her head out of her doorway. What are you doing here? Is that shitnerd here? The blonde ignored her question in place of his own. She furrowed her brows. No. Deku went back to his hotel to get his stuff. He should be here later. Bakugou stiffened at her response. So, you two figured your bullshit out then.
Yeah.
She chewed on her lip as she opened her door wider. Not really, but it's a start. Do you want to come in? He frowned as he watched her motion him inside, but ducked through the threshold anyway. Once the door was shut behind them, he glanced around the room. Her place was still organized with ragtag furniture and cheap decorations. The vibrant colors are what irked him the most. What was with this girl and pastel shit? So, she started uncertainly. What's up? She circled around him toward her kitchenette and began pushing stuff to the side so could sit at her counter. He ignored her hospitality and chose to stand in his place. Fucking relax. It's about work. Oh. She blinked with wide eyes and realized that he wasn't going to sit. You couldn't just call me about it? Bakugou narrowed his eyes. I deleted your number. She huffed irritably and scribbled her number down on a slip of paper for him. So, what is this about? My informant gave up some half-decent information. Bakugou scowled in her direction. Something big is about to go down involving the Mamushi group. Apparently, their head viper is in town and is getting ready to deal with some kind of uprising. Really? Uraraka raised her eyebrows in surprise. I guess that explains the lack of villains in the streets. I haven't reported this, Bakugou replied curtly. I don't want to miss our chance by having all the fucknut heroes in the city looking for them. I want to be the one to take this bastard down. The blonde raised a fist and clenched it tightly. You and Kirishima are the only ones who know, so keep your phone nearby. This could go down any minute. Uraraka took a moment to register this. Well, I really think we need to report this, Bakugou. We should at least get Edshot looped in, right? I will in the morning. Bakugou snapped back harshly. I'm not looking to get my ass fired. Uraraka frowned at him. You don't have to say it so rudely. I'm just trying to help. The blonde couldn't stop his heart from skipping in his chest. She looked tired, but her testy tone still had the bite it usually did. This might be the only chance he'd get before she finished fixing her shit with Deku. Uraraka. He started, but the words died in his throat. She hummed and smiled at him as she leaned against her countertop. Bakugou dropped his duffel bag to the floor and took a bold step in her direction. I don't give a shit about you and Deku, but damn it, you had better know that he'll never fucking change. Her eyes became round with surprise at the change of topic. What are you talking about? He dared to take a second step. That fucking prick doesn't change. Ever. Don't expect him to be someone he's not. He won't change for anyone, not even you. He deepened his frown as she stared back. I know that Deku and I have a lot of things to work out, but... She trailed off as Bakugou took a third and fourth step. What was he doing? Why did he look so determined? Like I said, he came within reaching distance of her. I don't give a shit about you, and that fucking nerd. He took a half step closer and looked her dead in the eyes. But you deserve better than his wannabe ass. Uraraka could help the faint blush that was beginning to fade onto her cheeks as she looked up at Bakugou. The intensity of his stare made her feel like she was pinned down under it. Her mind seemed to come to a standstill, and the only thought that she could make out was the words that Mina had said to her yesterday. Was it true? Did Bakugou truly harbor feelings toward her? He couldn't. Bakugou wasn't sure if he was swollen with pride or if he'd let it go completely as he took that final step. He was a breath away from her now, and he looked down at her. His expression was stoic as he observed her response. She could feel the furious heat of his person, and she found it satisfying. It wasn't a heat that felt like a warm hug or a hot coffee cup on a chilly morning. The heat that radiated off Bakugou was violent and inviting at the same time. The space between them felt like a dare. In the span of a second, Bakugou watched Uraraka become timid before him. She stared into his red eyes with cloudy brown ones, and she seemed stuck where she was. Her jaw was slanted open just slightly, and he could hardly make out the blush on her cheeks, but it was there. He moved quickly and snatched her slack jaw, relishing in her shock. He gruffly pushed it shut but held his hand in place. You look like a fucking deer in the headlights, round face. He couldn't hide the smug smirk on his lips. She seemed to snap out of her frozen state, and after a moment of delay, she hardened her eyes at him. You can't do things like that, Bakugou. She slapped his hand away from her chin. It's just rude. She looked away and let her hair cover the ever-darkening blush. Bakugou didn't hesitate before grabbing at her chin again and jerking her face back into his view. I'm always rude. His eyes darted to her reddened cheeks. I thought you'd have learned that by now. Stop. She slapped his hand away again with a forceful tone. What are you doing? Her blush didn't disappear, but her eyelids dropped with her warning expression. He let his hand hang in the air, a few inches away from her face. He didn't know how to answer her question. In fact, he doubted he had an answer at all. He'd never been good with words, so he'd always chosen action. But right now, there wasn't an action that he could do, so he simply stared at her. Bakugou's intense gaze made Uraraka feel like she was melting under it. It was severe and demanding, but she fought for her demeanor. She needed to push back, and his lack of response was not helping her resolve. Is there something you want to say? She pushed the words past her lips, and she was thankful that her tone was even. In fact, it sounded demanding. Bakugou didn't respond for a while longer. He just held her gaze and savored the burning fight in her eyes. This was the uraraka that he found most tantalizing. It wasn't often that he'd been able to see it. Fleeting moments here and there she would say something that presented him with a genuine challenge. This was the most he'd ever seen of it. Finally, he jerked his hovering hand back and snatched the slip of paper with her phone number off the countertop. You wish I did. He removed himself from her proximity and showed her his back. Be ready for a fight, round face. Count yourself fucking lucky that I even considered you for this. He snatched his duffel bag from the floor and turned to look at her somewhat flustered state. In fact, you should be thanking me. She hid her trembling hands behind her back as he looked back at her from his new position by the door. What was that just now? She prayed that she didn't sound hollow. The blonde's expression didn't change and remained hardened. It should be obvious, Uraraka. Not even you could be that fucking blind. He slung the bag over his shoulder and propped her front door open. See you tomorrow. She watched as the door shut behind him, and she stared at it with a dumbfounded expression. Countless different emotions clouded her heart at the same time, and her trembling hands flew up to clutch her chest. What just happened? Deku took the long way back to Uraraka's apartment. He'd checked out of his hotel, and he found himself walking the entire way there. He had a lot of thoughts in his mind, and he needed some more time to sort them out before he saw her again. Uraraka seemed different. Something about her had changed, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. She'd been brutally honest at dinner when they discussed their relationship, but he couldn't just chalk that up to her being sincere about their future. No, she had been harsh and unapologetic about it. Her smile was also different. When he first arrived, it was forced. After they talked, it had looked unfulfilled, and finally, after they'd planned to meet at her apartment that night, it felt like a fake. Like a shell of the smile he was used to seeing when he'd come home after a long day at work. Uraraka was also the touchy type, but she hadn't laid a finger on him since he'd arrived in Japan. She'd kept her hands to herself at dinner, and even as they made their plans outside the restaurant, she'd kept a distance. Was it because she was nervous, or because she was uncomfortable? Possibly both, and possibly neither. Deku's wonder was slowly evolving into concern as he looked down at the sidewalk. He was nearly there now, and he was trying to quash the questions in his mind. He needed to appear normal around her, and hopefully they wouldn't have to rehash their dinner conversation. Fucking seriously? A voice growled ahead of him. Again? Deku's eyes snapped up, and he was faced with the person he was least enthused to see, Kaken. Bakugou was glaring at him with the same fervor as he had the day before. I'm not doing this shit again. The blonde tucked his hands in his pockets and moved to go around Deku. Wait. Deku grabbed Bakugou by the arm. Were you just at Uraraka's? Bakugou shook his ex-classmate off and glowered. Fucking touch me again, and see what happens, fuckwad. Answer the question, Kaken. Deku didn't cower away from the threat, but dropped his hand. What are you doing out here? The blonde clearly wanted no part of this, but he spat out a response. None of your damn business, nerd. It's work-related. Bakugou leaned forward menacingly. And that's not exactly your purview anymore, is it? It is if it involves Uraraka. Deku held his ground, braving the storm that was Bakugou. Tisich. Bakugou scoffed at the other man's bold reply. You prove my point again, Deku. You'll never fucking change. Deku was rarely irritable, but he couldn't stop the annoyance building in his gut. You're one to talk, Kakken. Why are you so focused on me changing? What do you know that I don't? All I know about you is one thing. Bakugou turned on his heel to face Deku fully. You're the fucking thorn in my side that I can't get rid of. Deku hardened his gaze. You know what I mean, Kakken. Bakugou scowled at his former friend and classmate. Are you hard of hearing, Deku? I've already said every fucking thing that I wanted to say to you yesterday. I'm done wasting my time here. The blonde turned around again to walk away. Are you in love with her? Deku asked suddenly, dreading the reply. He watched as Bakugou halted mid-step and went rigid. She's all yours, Deku. The words came out in a low tone. For as long as you can keep her. Deku's stomach dropped as he watched Bakugou begin walking away again. He'd been suspecting this since yesterday, but the blonde's response did little to confirm it. If what he suspected was the truth, he still didn't know if he could reasonably label Bakugou as a threat to his relationship. Deku waited until the blonde was out of sight before he continued his walk toward Uraraka's. She had mentioned that she and the Bakugou were friends, but surely Uraraka would never take any sort of liking to him. Bakugou was so far away from everything that Uraraka claimed she wanted in a partner. He was rude, unforgiving, and most importantly, unapologetic about the first two. And he was absorbed with being the top hero so much that he left little room for other pleasures. No, there was no way Uraraka would want that. But on the off chance that is what she wanted, how would he know? How could he surmise that she was having a change of heart? Surely there would be signs. But how could he distinguish signs like that against the difficulties of their relationship? Would they be different or the same? He shook his head hard as he trudged up the stairs to her apartment. He needed to rid himself of these thoughts. Perhaps he was overthinking all of this. Uraraka had told him that he needed to worry less. He needed to listen to that advice if he wanted to fix this. He let himself into her apartment and found her drawing a bath. Hey, he waved shyly as she exited the bathroom to grab a fresh towel. Hey, she smiled a small smile and pulled a towel out of a cupboard. I was just going to take a quick bath. I won't be very long. You're fine. Deku waved his hand, and his eyes wandered the room. I'm sure I can find something to do for a while. All right. Uraraka nodded and tiptoed back to her bedroom and shut the bathroom door behind her. Deku wandered over to her couch to sit down and noticed that her laptop was not in its usual spot on the coffee table. Curiously, he glanced around the room but didn't see it. Had she hidden it from him? Perhaps he deserved that. His eyes caught on her pink duffel bag that was set on one of her kitchen bar stools. It looked like it was recently touched and had been haphazardly opened. He found himself going to check it out and found that her hero costume had been shoved into the bag messily and all of her extra equipment had been thrown on top. He reached down to feel the fabric of the suit and found it damp, like it hadn't finished drying before she tossed it in. Would this have to do with the work-related thing that Bakugou had mentioned? Whatever it was, it didn't appear very Uraraka-like. Normally, she was very organized and she always neatly folded her costume before putting it away. It felt like organization had been an afterthought this time. Perhaps Uraraka was just as stressed as he was about this entire situation and hadn't paid any mind to her normal habits. Deku finally opted to ignore the mess and moved to go sit on her sofa. He switched on the television to distract himself. Uraraka always took long baths, so he had some time to kill. On the other end of the apartment, Uraraka was as still as stone in her bath. She was neck-deep in the water as she tended to her frayed nerves. Deku was inside her apartment while she was thinking about someone else. Her boyfriend was the second thing on her mind, and that was more unsettling than her entire encounter with Bakugou. Her hand moved under the water to touch her chin. Bakugou had grabbed it so urgently and had held it with such a tight grip. It didn't hurt or sting, but it ached from the touch. His skin had been rough and his grasp even more so. He'd commanded the situation with nothing more than his presence and had easily decimated her resolve. His red eyes flashed in her mind, and she shuddered at their memory, the bath water rippling around her. They'd been so clear yet so guarded as they looked straight through her, and the heat of his body had been intoxicating. The entire event had been out of her control. She ran her thumb over her chin again and blew some bubbles in the water. She didn't want to admit it, but she had enjoyed it. She hadn't missed the excitement in his eyes when she'd finally told him to stand down. It was that push and pull of their relationship that she was sure bakugou liked the most, and that she too was beginning to like. She searched for a word to describe it, and she blushed at her realization. It had been a growing flirtation between them. The apologies, the dance, and the staying at his apartment. All these things were symptoms of the blossoming affection. Her heart began to flutter in her chest. She sharply sat up in the bath, the water sloshing around her.
No.
She couldn't think like this. Her heart belonged to someone else. She had made a commitment, and she needed to stick to it. She knew how bakugou felt, but she squashed any reciprocated feelings down deep, locking them away in her heart. The very thought of them was a betrayal to Deku, and he deserved better than that. A lustful feeling was not real, and she slapped that very label on bakugou in her heart. What she had with Deku was very real and very well seasoned. It was familiar and comfortable, so she wouldn't dare herself to stray from that. She needed to confirm her thoughts and immediately set to shaving her legs. There was only one real way to do that. Perhaps this would help her forget the wretched desires of her heart and replace them with something wholesome. A long time had passed before she finally emerged from the bathroom and slipped into the living room. Deku broke his gaze from a television to settle on her with a dropped jaw. What is this? Uraraka simply kicked her bedroom door open wider and motioned for him to come in. She hoped that he couldn't see the tremble of her fingers as she waved him over and finally disappeared from his sight. As soon as Deku entered the room, she was standing beside her bed. She stood still as he slowly walked over, his eyes looking her up and down. This is... He finally reached her, and he pulled slightly on the strap of her pink nightgown. I haven't seen this thing in a long time. Not since our anniversary. Uraraka breathed the words out quietly as she let him finger the white lace lining the top. That's right. Deku nodded and met her eyes. Why now? She felt herself shrink at the question. Do you really need an answer? The truth was that she simply couldn't tell him. He shook his head slightly before he tenderly brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. You look so beautiful. He finally tilted his head down to kiss her. As soon as their lips met, she was horribly disappointed. The magic that his kiss usually had felt dismal and incomplete. It felt like a plain kiss instead of the fireworks she wanted. In a desperate need for more, she gripped his shirt and pulled him into her. Whoa! Deku broke the kiss and stumbled forward. Why are you in such a hurry? She didn't reply, but instead used her grip on his shirt to pull him back down to her lips. Thankfully, he didn't bother her with it further and finally settled his hands on her hips gently. She staggered backward onto the bed, never breaking their kiss as they did. Her hands released their grip and began working on peeling the shirt off, but Deku stopped her. Hey, he whispered and met her eyes. We don't have to do this if you don't want to. He brushed a lock of hair from her eyes. I don't want you to feel pressured. She sighed loudly. Deku, you're getting laid.
Do you really want to ruin that?
I'm just saying dash. He started cautiously but was silenced when Uraraka pulled his shirt over his head and yanked him back down by the shoulders to another kiss. This time, she didn't let him pull back again. She begged his lips for more and more, but not even his hands were that creative with the turn-ons. He clumsily palmed her, and she was left feeling disappointed. Where was the fire? Had their sex always been this boring? Finally, she pushed him off and huffed. We need to stop. Stop. Deku rolled over on the bed and sat up. I thought you wanted this. She closed her eyes and pulled on the end of the nightgown. I do. It's just not. She was unable to finish her sentence. Deku tilted his head. Uraraka, what is it? Are you all right? I'm fine. She breathed and shut her eyes tightly. I just can't get turned on. They were both quiet for a while before Deku retrieved his shirt from the space between them and sighed. Let's just go to bed, okay? I think we're both just tired. Uraraka felt a tear in her eyes, but she willed it not to come to fruition. It was the same thing that Deku had said countless times over the years. They'd had this problem before, but this time, his excuse didn't feel good enough. She was a bundle of nervous energy that wanted nothing more than to get busy. She wasn't tired. She was unfulfilled and upset. She finally nodded once the tears began to dry up and went to change into her normal sleeping clothes. She peeled the nightgown off and stared at it in her hands. When she'd first worn this for him, it had created a magical and pleasant memory. Now, it was nothing more than that. It was just a sliver of her memories with Deku that she had tried to recreate. Unfortunately, it hadn't had the effect that she had hoped for. She tried desperately to ignore the anger that had settled in her stomach as she climbed into the bed beside Deku. There was little chance she was going to get restful sleep tonight. "I love you, Uraraka," Deku mumbled after a while. She was silent for a few moments before she finally forced the words out, "I love you too." She knew that they were words that were losing their validity. Fixing this relationship was going to be so much harder than she thought. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.